Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another episode of Friendly Friday, a weekly series where we take a look at budget, standard or modern decks, and this week we are revisiting our black-white vampire deck in standard with the addition of Rivals of Ixalan. So let's jump right into it here, starting out with our 1-drops, where we have 3 copies of Legion's Landing, a legendary enchantment that makes a 1/1 lifelinking vampire token, and if we attack with 3 or more creatures we get to transform Legion's Landing into the legendary land Adanto, the first fort, which can make additional vampire tokens. Next up we have 2 copies of Fatal Push to take out creatures with converted mana cost 2 or less, and we have a few ways to easily enable a Revolt in our deck to take out creatures with converted mana cost 4 or less as well. Next up we get to our 2-drops, where we have 4 copies of Martyr of Dusk, 2 mana 2/1, that when it dies we get to make a 1/1 lifelinking vampire token, and there's a few ways in the deck where we can easily take advantage of the multiple bodies from the Martyr of Dusk, and it's also pretty resilient against removal spells. Next up we have 3 copies of Paladin of Atonement, which is a 2 mana 1/1, and at the beginning of each upkeep, so that also includes the opponent's upkeep, if we lost life last turn we get to put a +1/+1 counter on the Paladin, and when a Paladin dies we get to gain life equal to its toughness. So there's a few easy ways to put additional +1/+1 counters on the Paladin without needing to rely on the opponent dealing us damage. Namely, we have a total of 7 Pain lands here with Shefet Dunes and Ifnir Deadlands, where if we make colored mana we lose 1 life, so that's a nice way to put +1/+1 counters on the Paladin. And then we also have our next card, Dusk Legion Zealot, which when it enters the battlefield we get to draw a card and lose 1 life, so that's another great way for us to put additional +1/+1 counters on the Paladin of Atonement, so that it can grow very large very quickly. Dusk Legion Zealot is a great card in our deck regardless of any Paladins of Atonement, as a 2 mana 1/1 that replaces himself in our deck, since we want as many vampires in play as possible. Next up we have 4 copies of Legion Lieutenant, which is a 2 mana 2/2 that's a lord for vampires, so other vampires we control get +1/+1, which is perfect in our deck where we can make multiple vampire tokens and go wide, and giving all of those +1/+1 is very powerful. Next up we have 2 copies of Mavren Fein, a 3 mana 2/2 that says whenever 1 or more non-token vampires we control attack, we get to make a 1/1 lifelinking vampire token, and with cards like Martyr of Dusk and Dusk Legion Zealot that we don't mind sending into the red zone, it's an easy way for us to make additional vampire tokens with Mavren Fein. Then we have 4 copies of Radiant Destiny, which is always going to name Vampire in our deck, so it gives all our vampires, including the tokens, +1/+1, and if we have 10 or more permanents we get the City's Blessing, so all our creatures will also have Vigilance, which is not irrelevant. Next up we have 2 copies of Yahenni, a 3 mana 2/2 with haste, and whenever a creature the opponent controls dies, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Yahenni, and we can also sacrifice another creature we control to make Yahenni indestructible until end of turn, so that's another great use for our Martyr of Dusk and our various tokens that are laying around. So that way we can make Yahenni indestructible, maybe in combination with Mavren Fein we can keep attacking with Yahenni, make even more tokens to help make our Yahenni indestructible in the future. So a very synergistic card in our deck for sure, and can also sacrifice our Paladin of Atonement at any point to gain us a bunch of life back if we have to. Then we have 2 copies of Ixalan's Binding as a versatile removal spell that can exile any non-land permanent from the opponent, and the opponent can't cast spells with the same name as the exiled card, so if they play multiples then they're in trouble. Next up we have 4 copies of Call to the Feast, which is a 4 mana sorcery that makes 3 1/1 vampire creature tokens with a lifelink, so it goes very well with our go wide plan, with our Legion Lieutenant and Radiant Destiny. And last but not least, we have 2 copies of Elenda, the Dusk Rose, which is a 4 mana 1/1 with a lifelink, and whenever another creature dies, so that also includes our own creatures, we can put a +1/+1 counter on Elenda, and when Elenda dies we get to make X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with a lifelink, where X is Elenda's power, so if Elenda gets boosted by something like a Legion Lieutenant or a Radiant Destiny, we get even more lifelinking vampire tokens for our troubles. And Elenda also synergizes nicely with Yahenni, since with Yahenni we can sacrifice Elenda at any point to make those lifelinking vampire tokens. Then taking a quick look at our mana base, we have 4 copies of Concealed Courtyard, which comes into play untapped if it's one of our first 3 lands. We also have Forsaken Sanctuary as a necessary evil, which comes into play tapped. Then we get to our deserts. We have 3 copies of Ifnir Deadlands. Goes very nicely with our Paladin of Atonement, but also the activated ability to give a creature 2 -1/-1 counters is very powerful in the late game if we're flooding out. And then we also have Shefet Dunes, 4 copies, which can also give our creatures +1/+1 until end of turn if we sacrifice a desert, which is very powerful when we're going wide with tokens. And then a bunch of basic lands, 5 plains and 4 swamps. Then quickly going over the sideboard, we have 4 copies of Duress against control and combo decks, 2 copies of Fragmentize to take out cheap artifacts and enchantments, 2 copies of Bontu's Last Reckoning against creature decks. Also goes very nicely with cards like Yahenni, since we can make her indestructible, and all the creatures dying will put a lot of +1/+1 counters on Yahenni as well. Then we have 2 copies of Profane Procession for grindy games, where the opponent might rely on a few key creatures. We have 1 copy of Lost Legacy against approach decks, 1 more copy of Ixalan's Binding, 2 copies of Champion of Dusk against control decks, where we can draw a lot of extra cards and the life loss doesn't really matter if our opponent isn't pressuring our life total. And we also have 1 copy of the Immortal Sun for grindy games, where we get to draw an additional card each turn, and giving our creatures +1/+1 is always relevant. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand looks fine. We've got 2 Martyrs of Dusk to start off with, and a Paladin of Atonement. Don't have any deserts to go with it, but could be that our opponent's on an aggro deck and we take some damage early. Red-green from the opponent, so could be the red-green monsters deck. And Ifnir Deadlands here is very interesting, since now we can just play out the Paladin of Atonement, and I will pay 1 life here, so that we get to put a +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the opponent's upkeep. So we can keep using the desert to grow the Paladin, unless our life total, of course, becomes a problem. Opponent with an Earthshaker Kenra. That prevents our Paladin from blocking, but if our opponent gets in, then that also grows the Paladin, so no big deal. Legion's Landing's a nice draw, although we can't play that and our Martyr of Dusk. So I think I will just be playing the Martyr of Dusk here, paying again for the desert, and getting in for 3. And we want to try and grow the Paladin larger than a 4/4 so that it survives any potential Chandras or Glorybringer activations from the opponent. And if our opponent attacks with the Kenra, I think I will just block with the Martyr of Dusk. Or I guess we can just take it and then attack back for 7, which is also fine. 3rd land for the opponent. Let's see if they get in there. They do. So we could just take it, but trading seems fine here. Don't need to get too greedy, and we can still grow the Paladin 1 larger next turn if we want to. And there's a Jadelight Ranger from the opponent. And they revealed 2 lands, so they get to draw 2 cards here essentially, which is nice for them. A Forest and a Hashep Oasis. Alright, Fatal Push the draw. We can just send with both. Play a Martyr of Dusk, keep up Fatal Push. I think we just start by attacking with both here. And see if our opponent is interested in trading or chumping. Opponent just takes it. And then second main, I think we do want to pay the life here before a potential Chandra can come down. So let's pay the life and play out the Martyr of Dusk. And then next turn we can maybe play out a Legion's Landing and flip it. So Paladin up to a 5/5. It's going to be difficult for the red-green deck to kill with just 1 card. And we still have Fatal Push at the ready if our opponent tries to kill any of our creatures. And right, our opponent scoops it up so they can't handle the giant Paladin of Atonement. And awesome, we get to go to sideboarding here against the red-green monsters deck. So Profane Procession I like, and Bontu's Last Reckoning I like as well. And Ixalan's Binding is also fine, as the opponent just has a few key threats that we need to handle. So what do we want to take out? Fatal Push isn't great, since the small creatures aren't really the problem from the opponent's deck. I could see taking out some copies of Mavren Fein, since we might not always be able to attack cleanly. I could see shaving an Elenda as well. So yeah, let's try out this configuration. And this hand looks fine. Does have another Paladin of Atonement with the desert, and our opponent was unable to beat that last time, so who knows. Opponent leaves with Sheltered Thicket once again. No luxury of cycling lands in black-white, unfortunately. So let's just play a tap land, say go. Double Legion Lieutenant is pretty powerful, although we don't have any token makers at the moment. Earthshaker Kenra gets in there. Another Forsaken Sanctuary, so I think we do just play the Paladin, and then the question is, do we want to lose a life or not? Since if our opponent just has a random Abrade, then losing 1 life of course is very relevant when our opponent's attacking us. I think we don't lose a life here, which could be a mistake, since we kind of want to get our Paladin larger than a 4/4, but I think it's pretty likely their opponent has a removal spell here, so... And if our opponent attacks us, then we get to grow the Paladin anyways. Alright, so we'll take it. Don't really want to trade here when we have all these Legion Lieutenants. And yep, there's a Magma Spray, so happy that we didn't lose 1 life for no reason. Down to 16 we go. And alright, I guess it's time to just start playing out these Lieutenants one by one. Now we do have to lose 1 life, unfortunately. So our best draw here is probably something like a Call to the Feast, as we have all these Anthem effects. Kenra gets in there, don't think we want to trade here, so we'll take it. And hope our opponent doesn't have a Phoenix or a Chandra. Alright, just a Thrashing Brontodon, which is not bad against our deck since we do run a lot of enchantments. And there's Profane Procession, which is a pretty good one. So I think the plan here is just to play out another Legion Lieutenant and play defense for now. Hopefully we can dodge a Glorybringer. Alright, there it is. So in a bit of trouble here, especially because of the Thrashing Brontodon. The Glorybringer is exerted, so it won't be bothering us next turn. So the question here is, can we afford to take the damage from the ground creatures as well? I think we have to trade, even though that's bad for us if our opponent has land number 6, because then they can Eternalize. But I don't think we can afford to take more damage here. So, alright. And Dusk Legion Zealot to draw. Not exactly what we were looking for. So we can play the Ixalan's Binding, but then our opponent just has the Brontodon. We can, I guess, use the Ixalan's Binding on the Brontodon. Then we have 1 turn of reprieve from the Glorybringer. We still have to deal with the Glorybringer next turn. Can play the Profane Procession. Opponent's likely to destroy it before we get a chance to activate it. I think our best bet is to use the Ixalan's Binding here on the Brontodon. Say go. And then hopefully next turn we can draw another Ixalan's Binding or some creatures that can gain us some life back. Another Earthshaker Kenra. So this will put us to 4. And Elenda doesn't really do it here. So if we play Elenda, we can jump in front of the Kenra and gain 1 life, so we're technically not dead. And if our opponent exerts, we still get the lifelinking token that can block the Kenra, so I guess we'll play the Elenda here. And say go. Too bad we didn't have the time to set up all these Radiant Destinies, otherwise Elenda could have gotten us a lot more value. Is this another Glorybringer? Yep. Alright, then we're just dead. Alright, so do we want to reconfigure after Sideboard? I guess Bontu's Last Reckoning would have been a nice draw, but if we played our Zealot there, we didn't have enough mana to also play the Reckoning. So I still like the Reckonings, the Bindings are great. Maybe we do want the Mavren Fein, but it's pretty vulnerable to all of the Glorybringers and such. Maybe Elenda's good enough, but I want to mind our curve here since we do have a lot of 4s. Yeah, I think I still like our setup here. Just need to get some creatures out early to block. Would like to be on the play. I don't think we can keep a 6-lander, even though it does have a few deserts that we can activate. Alright, this is a bit better. The Reckoning is gonna do a lot of work, and Ixalan's Binding is perfect. So yeah, let's just lead with the Legion's Landing. Even though our token's probably gonna die to our own Reckoning at some point. So we just want to try and get our opponent to overextend, and then we get to punish them with the Reckoning. So let's go ahead and attack for 1. Say go. And there's the Kenra, right on schedule. So it will be able to get in for 2, and then the question next turn is, do we still attack with our token or keep it on defense? Alright, Call to the Feast is a nice one. So I think I like keeping our token on defense here. Force our opponent to maybe use a removal spell on it, or play another Kenra perhaps. And if they offer the trade, that's fine by us. Just another tap land, and our opponent is offering the trade. Or perhaps they're gonna use something right now. Yep, Magma Spray, yeah, that's fine. So we take 2. And I think I'm fine with playing out the Call to the Feast despite our own Bontu's Last Reckoning, just to try and get our Legion's Landing transformed before we need to wipe the board, since that gives us a great late game advantage. And also buffers our life total, and now that we picked up a second copy, I think it's a no-brainer. Now we will not be trading if our opponent attacks, and if they keep using spot removal on our vampire tokens, that's also a fight I'm willing to fight. Alright, they do use another Magma Spray on a vampire, so we won't be flipping the Legion's Landing, in which case trading is perhaps fine. So we want to try and save the Ixalan's Binding to answer a Glorybringer or Rekindling Phoenix. So if we see one of those, we might fire off the Binding. There's a Threshing Brontodon instead, so that's gonna mess with our enchantments. But that does make our Bontu's Last Reckoning look pretty good. So now I think we're on the Reckoning plan before we try to Binding anything. But our opponent's just gonna fire off the Brontodon right now on the Legion's Landing, so alright, that's fine. Legion Lieutenant. So now we might actually be off the Reckoning plan, and we could just play Call to the Feast and the next turn Legion Lieutenant and start getting in there. Yeah, don't mind that. And then we still have the Ixalan's Binding to answer one problematic creature from the opponent. Opponent does decide to trade, which is fine. And then we'll play another Call to the Feast. Say go. And unless our opponent brought in any sweeper effects, these tokens are going to be difficult to deal with. Jade Light Ranger is fine, especially if it can only pick up 1 counter. Instead it picked up 2 lands. So our opponent's drawing lots of extra cards here with our Rangers. Opponent's got 2 mana at the ready, so they could have an answer to the Legion Lieutenant here, but another Ixalan's Binding is perfect. So let's play the Lieutenant, hope for the best, and attack with everyone. And now that the Ranger's just a 2-1, even if they do destroy the Lieutenant, it's not the end of the world, since their opponent doesn't get to eat any vampire token for free. Opponent does trade, and they take 6. Nope, they have another removal spell, it looks like. A Braid, yep. Alright, so they only take 3, but they still trade. So we're just waiting for our opponent to jam one of their large creatures here, so that we can use our Ixalan's Binding. Another Jade Light Ranger instead. If that picks up a counter, that would be annoying. Instead, once again our opponent picks up 2 lands, this time 2 mountains. In this case it's fine for us, since that way the Ranger doesn't trade. Now a struggle on a token, so our opponent's really trying to 1-for-1 every single vampire token. And yeah, we're just gonna keep getting in there. Do need to draw a threat at some point, since we're kind of out of action here. But we're not gonna die anytime soon, given our hand. We should be keeping track of how many lands our opponent still has in hand. If they at least have 1 mountain, they could have a forest as well. And now they're gonna Eternalize a Kenra, so we can definitely take a hit here. Don't need to fire off the Reckoning right away, and would prefer to keep the Ixalan's Binding for another creature here. Radiant Destiny is a nice one, since we can name Vampire and get in for 2 points of lifelink. And then we're just trading 2 damage for 2 damage essentially, which is fine since we're ahead on life. So we're just waiting for our opponent to commit something that we can Ixalan's Binding. Opponent gets in for 4. And another Jade Light Ranger. And once again 2 lands. Legion Lieutenant to draw. Alright, I guess we're still fine committing more creatures to the board here. That way our Vampire token doesn't trade unless our opponent has yet another spot removal spell. So we might see a Glorybringer come down now to take out the Lieutenant. Yep, there it is. Opponent keeps the Kenra on defense this turn, takes out the Lieutenant. So we have a few options here. We can just Ixalan's Binding the Glorybringer. Then our opponent needs a Naturalize or another Brontodon to get rid of it. But that would give the Glorybringer haste once again, which is kind of annoying. Opponent's going to use Survive to shuffle the graveyards. That's okay. Picked up a Shefet Dunes. So we could just wait a turn here, maybe chump block the Kenra, see if our opponent commits another creature and then go for the Last Reckoning instead of the Ixalan's Binding. Since there's no need to Ixalan's Binding the Glorybringer right now, unless the opponent has another one in hand. But in that case, just playing the Reckoning is fine as well. So I think I just like playing defense here and not using the Binding yet. And then maybe next turn if our opponent doesn't commit anything, we can Binding the Glorybringer. Another Ranger. This time it reveals an Abrade. And looks like our opponent is happy keeping the Abrade on top. So now this Reckoning's looking pretty good. And we will just be chumping here with our token, I think, since our opponent kept that Abrade on top anyways. Alright, Paladin of Atonement, not a bad one. So we can Reckoning and then play the Paladin, losing 1 life with the Shefet Dunes, but then the Paladin would just die to the Abrade is a problem. So we could just Last Reckoning and then not play the Paladin, since that way if we draw lands, we could play the Binding next turn if our opponent presents a Phoenix or another Glorybringer. I think I like that more here. Let's just play the Reckoning and not play the Paladin. Since I could see getting in trouble here if our opponent plays a hasty creature and then we're unable to use a Binding and opponent adds another hasty creature, then we might be too far behind. While if we draw land now, we could have access to the Binding. But it looks like our opponent's not adding anything to the board. So we don't get to untap. Did draw the land for the Binding, but... So we could just play the Paladin, trade for the Abrade. But I kind of want to get more value out of this Paladin first. So I think I'm going to say go. If we can find some more Radiant Destinies, maybe the Paladin is large enough to survive an Abrade. And there's an Earthshaker Kenra. So that could be a target for Ixalan's Binding, just because otherwise it's gonna come back from the graveyard once again. And Legion's Landing, alright, so that one I don't mind trading for an Abrade as much. So we can Legion's Landing. And our opponent only with 1 card left, and we know it's an Abrade. So I think it's fine to fire off one of these Ixalan's Bindings. And then after the opponent uses Abrade on the Vampire token, we can run out the Paladin, and they did decide to do that now, which is surprising, since I guess we should have kept our Shefet Dunes untapped for this possibility, since now we could have run out the Paladin, but I guess we do it anyways. Sure, we miss out on the Paladin growing right away, but we still get to use our mana efficiently. I think our opponent should have waited, since they have plenty of mana and no real reason to fire off the Abrade right there. Opponent now with another land. They did draw 6 lands off of their Jadelight Rangers, so it's only logical that they have a lot of lands in play. Alright, Dusk Legion Zealot's a nice one, since that way we don't have to use the Shefet Dunes, we lose 1 life with the Zealot. And another Radiant Destiny is perfect here. Name Vampire. Get in for 3. And we just need to dodge Glorybringer for 1 turn here, because then our Paladin will be large enough to survive an Exertion. So Paladin up to a 4/4. Still haven't seen any Rekindling Phoenixes from the opponent. Another Abrade instead. Can't take out the Paladin, so has to take out the Zealot. Kind of surprised that our opponent kept in all their spot removal here, but I guess they didn't have anything better. And another Paladin is great. So now our first Paladin will be a 5/5, and the second one will be a 4/4. And our opponent's almost dead this turn. Could have even used the Shefet Dunes to get in for 5, but might as well play more creatures. And let's see if our opponent plays out their last card. They do not, and we are victorious over red-green monsters. Still had the backup Ixalan's Binding in case they found a creature, but it wasn't necessary, so Paladin of Atonement did a lot of work this game. Opponent almost scooped immediately once it reached 5 power in the first game, so that just goes to show that having one larger vampire in your kind of go-wide deck can be very valuable against certain strategies. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand looks fine. Got some early action, some removal spells. Opponent with a turn 1 Minister, so looks like some sort of Godfarer's Gift deck. So I think we just played safe and Fatal Push that thing right away, so opponent doesn't get to mill themselves. Say go. I think we played a Zealot just to dig a little deeper, try to get to our Anthem effects and the like, even though the Martyr would get in for an additional point. Yeah, I think I still like playing the Zealot here. Opponent with an Opt. Alright, Concealed Courtyard, so we can play that next turn, and then go landing plus another Zealot or the Martyr. Opponent on mono blue so far, so perhaps they're not the deck we thought they were. And there we go, Legion Lieutenant is kind of the card we were looking for. So I think we lead with the Lieutenant. Opponent doesn't have any response. Get in for 2. And then play Legion's Landing. Opponent with an unsummon on the Legion Lieutenant, alright. So I guess we're glad that we waited with Legion's Landing here, since getting the token bounce would have been more annoying, since then we just lose the token. Well, we can just replay the Lieutenant next turn. Another Fatal Push, so let's start by playing the Lieutenant. See if they have any response. Supreme Will, alright, so they must have drawn this, otherwise they probably would have countered it last turn. Can't pay for it, so we'll just get in for 2. And then I think we just play another Zealot. Alright, they do have another unsummon after all, so we won't be flipping the landing next turn in this case. But I'm fine just playing another Zealot and get up on card advantage. Alright, there we go, Radiant Destiny. It's gonna increase our clock nicely. Opponent's not doing much. Second Destiny as well. So let's start by playing one of them. Do we see another counterspell? Name Vampire. Get in there. And our opponent is free to unsummon our Zealots, but I doubt they will. Supreme Will to look at the top 4. Probably should have waited until end of turn, unless they're looking for an unsummon, but that seems pretty bad in this spot. Opponent takes it, and we'll play the Martyr. Next turn we can play a second Destiny, flip the Legion's Landing, so we're in a good spot here. Opponent looks at the top 4 once again, not really where the opponent wants to be here. And yeah, looks like our opponent's just a mono blue deck. And another Destiny, sure. Let's play it. Name Vampire. And get in there. Wind's Rebuke. Alright, so we don't get to flip the Legion's Landing quite yet. But we do get to use our mana efficiently. And of course the Zealots have Vigilance thanks to their Radiant Destiny and the City's Blessing. 6 mana. Supreme Will once again. Opponent just spinning their wheels. Don't quite know what the big finish is. So not certain how we're gonna sideboard, since I assume we've got this one locked up. And yep, there's a concession. So after seeing the Minister of Inquiries, perhaps our opponent is on a mill deck, so I guess Duress is going to be pretty good here against a mill deck that's mostly spell-based. Don't think we want to keep in our removal spells, even though our opponent does have Minister of Inquiries, which could mill us for a bunch. I do like the Champion of Dusk in this matchup. I guess Elenda's not going to be great here. The Immortal Sun is a consideration, but if our opponent just bounces it, that's kind of annoying. I think this is fine, just boarded in a couple Duresses. Hope our opponent doesn't have a creature sideboard plan that we don't expect here. And this hand is a bit slow, but I don't think we can mulligan being on the draw, since if we do get to play the Destiny, then of course we are a bit faster. Maybe should have boarded out some number of Paladin of Atonement, since it only really grows if we have a desert, since I don't see our opponent attacking us. So perhaps those could have been something else. Alright, there's a desert, so never mind. Let's run out the Paladin. See if this gets countered by something. Nope, just an opt. Alright, so the Paladin will get a counter here on upkeep. And then next turn we have to decide if we want to run out the Radiant Destiny or the Martyr of Dusk. Alright, Fraying Sanity, now that makes more sense. So our opponent's just a mill deck. Just have to try and close out this game quickly. Picked up a Dusk Legion Zealot. Would be nice to be able to play 2 2-drops or a 4-drop next turn, and the Zealot does help us hit the land drops. It's more mana efficient here to play the Radiant Destiny, and if we want to add the most power, we just run out the Martyr of Dusk. I think we just go with the Martyr of Dusk and then lose one from the desert. And get in for 2. We did see a couple bounce spells from the opponent, which do reset the Paladin, so we might not get a very large Paladin before the opponent bounces him. Our opponent could also have cards like River's Rebuke to bounce our entire board, which is why a card like Duress can be very important. And there we go, speak of the devil. So we can Duress to check what our opponent is up to, and then still play out the Dusk Legion Zealot. So I guess we should attack first. And even if we play the Duress here, we will get milled by the Fraying Sanities a bunch, but I think that's a fine compromise. So let's start by Duressing. And yep, there's a River's Rebuke. 2 Compelling Arguments, which just mill us for 5. And a Glimmer of Genius. So those Compelling Arguments are pretty scary with 2 Fraying Sanities. So we might have to take one of those, since our opponent only has 4 lands, but if our opponent ever gets to River's Rebuke, we also lose the game probably. Still think we need to take a Compelling Argument here, since with double Fraying Sanity, that can mill us out really quickly. So let's take one of those and just hope our opponent can't get to their River's Rebuke before we kill them here. And with our Anthem effects, we might be able to get there in 2 turns. So if our opponent misses a land drop here, that would be huge. Alright, they did hit a land, and now they can also play their Glimmer of Genius to ensure hitting a land drop for next turn, so that they will be able to play their River's Rebuke, which is going to buy them a lot of time. So definitely don't want to play Call to the Feast if we find a land next turn, but just playing one of our Anthem effects to get in for more damage seems fine. So we get to untap. Legion's Landing is actually quite good here, since that will transform, giving us an additional land. So let's play that. Make a token. The token will die, but that's fine. We just want as many lands as possible here. Play the Legion Lieutenant, get in for 10, put the opponent to 3, flip the Legion's Landing, and then we just need to get in those last 3 points of damage before our opponent mills us out, which should be doable. And if our opponent misses on a land, they're also just dead, but yeah, they do have the Ifnir Deadlands, which is also pretty scary with Fraying Sanity. And our opponent actually firing off the Compelling Argument rather than the River's Rebuke, so they're just trying to kill us here. Who knows, perhaps they did the math and they can just mill us out here. So Rivulet plus Argument, so they mill us for 9, and then 2 Fraying Sanity triggers. So the first Fraying Sanity trigger will mill us for 9, and then the second one for 18. So yeah, we still have 8 cards left in library, so perhaps our opponent miscounted. And yep, there we go, our opponent scoops it up, so we managed to beat Mono Blue Mill. So knowing our opponent was on this Mono Blue Mill deck, we could have also considered bringing in a copy of Lost Legacy just to name Fraying Sanity, since if we can get rid of all their Fraying Sanities before they can deploy them, I don't think our opponent can mill us out just by casting a whole bunch of mill spells, just because the quality of the mill spells in Standard isn't very high. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play. And this hand looks fine. A bit on the pricey side perhaps, with all these 4-drops. But the Zealot draws us a card and then goes nicely with the Paladin, so we'll keep. So let's lead with the Sanctuary. Then on turn 2 probably play the Paladin first. And then the Zealot will also grow the Paladin. Second Paladin, so perhaps we want to play both Paladins before playing the Zealot. Although we would like to hit our land drops. Red-green. And a turn 2 Drover of the Mighty, so we're up against a dinosaur deck most likely. Legion's Landing the draw, so I think I like attacking and offering the trade, which I don't think our opponent will do here, since the Drover's usually pretty valuable. And then second main, think we're better off still playing a Paladin first. Try to grow them as much as possible. Opponent does not have any plays, which is pretty interesting. Could once again attack with our Paladins, since I'm still fine trading one with the Drover, despite having the Zealot. So yeah, let's get in there. And we want to attack before playing the Zealot, since once our opponent sees the Zealot, perhaps our opponent's more interested in trading. Alright, they do have a Magma Spray for one. And they're just going to take the damage, which is fine. So let's go ahead and play the Zealot. And play the landing, which could already transform next turn. Opponent could have another removal spell here. And yep, they're just going to braid the Paladin. Alright, that's fine, we gain some life in return. So really need to draw land next turn, otherwise we're not doing much. Managed to draw most of our 4-drops. And 5 mana for a Regisaur Alpha. So if we can draw land and play an Ixalan's Binding on that thing, we should be in okay shape. The hasty Dino gets in there, not gonna block. And we missed on a land, but did find a Yahenni. Guess we're playing Yahenni. I guess we could actually attack with everyone now, thanks to the hasty Yahenni, and flip the Legion's Landing, which is probably worth it, just to guarantee having access to 4 lands next turn. Opponent just takes it, doesn't want to risk running into a trick. Alright, so opponent gets to untap. And we could take a pretty big hit here if our opponent has another Dino. A Galta Primal Hunger, alright, luckily we have the Ixalan's Binding, but it does have haste, so we could just be dead here. So 16, yep, I think we're just dead. So yeah, that's unfortunate. Pretty early Galta from our opponent, missed one land drop. And that's it, so on to sideboarding. Things should get a bit better here since we get to add Bontu's Last Reckoning, another Ixalan's Binding, and I even like the Profane Procession here. Probably still want a Fatal Push just to take out the mana creatures. And don't love the Yahenni in this matchup, even though it combines nicely with the Last Reckoning. And then I could see taking out Elenda, and I could see taking out something like a Radiant Destiny, or perhaps even a Legion Lieutenant, which just trades for a removal spell. I think I'll go with the Radiant Destiny here and try this. Would like to be on the play. Only 2 lands, which could be an issue, but having the Last Reckoning makes a lot of hands look pretty good, so let's just lead with the Sanctuary Sigo. I think if we just keep drawing lands for the rest of the game, this hand is quite good. And there's another Sanctuary. I think I still like running out the Paladin here and get that going, since if we can find an untapped land next turn, we could play Mavren and start making vampire tokens, and if not, we still just play the tap land. Opponent could have the choice here of perhaps killing the Paladin before it gets too large, or playing a Mana Dork, and perhaps here they're deciding to go for the removal spell instead. Well, we drew the untapped land, so I think we're kind of forced to play the Mavren, even though our opponent likely just kills a Paladin before we get to attack. But that's still not going to change our play. And they're going to Magma Spray the Paladin. Could have actually killed the Mavren Fein before attacks. Alright, so next turn we might be able to attack with Mavren and make a token. And if our opponent is slowing down to kill our stuff, that's the perfect situation for Profane Procession to be good. Opponent with a Migration revealing Thrashing Brontodon, so don't want to play the Procession before we answer the Brontodon. So yeah, let's just play a tap Sanctuary and attack for 2. Make a token. So playing around this Brontodon is going to be a challenge, but I'm sure we'll manage. Opponent with a Ripjaw Raptor, so that kind of halts our attack unless we want to use an Ixalan's Binding, forcing the Brontodon, and then we can answer back with the Profane Procession, kind of like that. So let's play our land, play the Binding, and get in there. And all of a sudden, if we draw an Anthem effect, we could just be on the offensive, rather than having to rely on the grindy late game of Procession. Opponent could have also brought in some sweeper effects, like Sweltering Suns. And there we see the Brontodon. So definitely don't want to attack here, since the opponent can blow up the Binding, and then block with a Ripjaw Raptor. which would be kind of a disaster. But I imagine they will sacrifice a Brontodon at some point. And they're actually going to Savage Stomp here, alright, to take out the Mavren Fein. Interesting that they chose to do it this way rather than freeing up the Ripjaw Raptor first and then fighting with that one. And now we picked up a Fatal Push. I think I actually like attacking here. If our opponent blocks the Vampire tokens, we just Fatal Push the Brontodon. If they go for the Ixalan's Binding play, we also just Fatal Push the Ripjaw Raptor. And looks like our opponent's blocking a Vampire, so now if we use the Fatal Push, they can free up the Ripjaw Raptor underneath the Ixalan's Binding, but then we get to make the Profane Procession, which I think is worth it. So opponent does get a bit of value here, the way they played it. So yep, they get their Ripjaw Raptor back, but now our Profane Procession can take over. And we still have the Last Reckoning as a backup plan here. So just need to dodge your opponent having another Naturalize effect, and we should be good. And yep, there's Regisaur Alpha. Opponent can get in for 7. And Sweeper effects combine nicely with the Procession, since your opponent's kind of incentivized to overextend, to overload the Procession, and then they just walk into your Sweeper effect. And Dusk Legion Zealots, so don't have enough mana to play this and activate the Procession, so I think we're just saying go. Jumping with the Vampire and using the Procession on the Ripjaw Raptor most likely. Or we could use it on the Alpha pre-combat if our opponent plays another big dinosaur. Another Ripjaw Raptor. Alright, so looks like this Last Reckoning is going to be pretty good. So let's go ahead and block the Regisaur Alpha. And then use the Procession on the Ripjaw Raptor, just to prevent some damage and get that started. So we take a total of 6 down to 9, and they even have a follow-up Drover of the Mighty, so yeah, this Last Reckoning is just going to be devastating. So we can play Last Reckoning and then play the Zealot as well. Sure, we don't get to untap our lands, but I think that's fine. Maybe should have tapped the Deadlands, since we do still have a couple Legion's Landings in the deck and only one Fatal Push, so probably should have tapped differently there. Alright, opponent does nothing, we don't get to untap, and yep, there's a Legion's Landing, so kind of got punished there. I think we're just gonna keep the Zealot on defense, preserve our life total in case they have another hasty dino, and then next turn we get to start activating the Procession once again, and the opponent might just start holding their dinos in their hand out of fear. So here we do have enough mana to play the Lieutenant and activate the Procession. Could just go all in, play the Call to the Feast and the Legion's Landing here, as well as the Lieutenant. Would kind of get owned by a Sweltering Suns from the opponent. I think we start by playing the Lieutenant. Attack for 2, see what our opponent does. If they use a spot removal spell on the Lieutenant, then they probably don't have the Sweeper effect. Alright, they are firing off an Abrade, so now I feel safe committing the Call to the Feast and Legion's Landing, since otherwise it makes more sense for them to wait. And Legion's Landing. And then say go. And yep, there we go. On to a game 3. So do we change anything? We did see the Brontodon, which can be an issue, but not much we can do about that one. Yeah, I think we just run it back. Opponent will be more cognizant of the Last Reckoning, so we might not see them overextend, but if we don't have the Last Reckoning, that just plays to our advantage. So this hand's a bit slow, and it does rely pretty heavily on the Ixalan's Bindings, but I think it's probably a keep. This is certainly the kind of hand that can benefit from our opponent playing around Bontu's Last Reckoning. They are going to lead with a Drover, which is not what we want to see here. Ifnir Deadlands a draw. I think we are attacking for 1 here, since our opponent's likely to just tap out for a 4 mana dino, so they can't attack us back with the Drover anyways. Right, just a hard cast Thundered Migration They probably don't have anything to do with their spare mana, so don't want us to see one of their dinos in their hand, so that makes sense. Alright, they're gonna keep the Drover on defense, interesting. Alright, Deadlands plus Paladin is a nice combo here, so let's get in for one. I imagine our opponent takes it, and then we can run out the Paladin. And I think I'm okay paying life since our opponent's likely to just play a big dinosaur next turn rather than kill the Paladin, so the additional counter might matter. And now we just have to hope those bindings can keep our opponent off balance long enough for us to maybe transform the Legion's Landing, get Call to the Feast going, draw an Anthem effect, go from there. Second Drover. Do they have a dino? They do not. So they might be playing conservatively here, which might benefit us. And Shefet Dunes is not a bad one either. Yeah, I think we just send in both. I'm fine if our opponent double blocks. Opponent just takes it. So they could have a sweeper effect, but that also would kill their own drovers, so don't think we need to play around a sweeper here too much. We will pay the life with a desert. And say go. So Paladin slowly getting out of a braid range, and their opponent might be flooding a bit here, as they don't have any action. Another Call to the Feast, so let's start by attacking with everyone and flipping this Legion's Landing. Opponent just takes it. And now I think we don't need to play another Call to the Feast. We're fine just activating the Adanto. Alright, our opponent didn't find any creatures and they just scoop it up that to an activation from Adanto and an activation from Shefet Dunes. Alright, so we managed to beat red-green dinos. I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached, we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.